The cap and gown made Sarah look so much older than 18. As I watched my daughter adjust her graduation cap in the rearview mirror of our car, my heart swelled with pride and ached with the knowledge that this moment marked the end of an era. What I didn't know was that it would also mark the beginning of my liberation. "Mom, do I look okay?" Sarah asked, turning to face me with nervous excitement dancing in her brown eyes, eyes that mirrored my own. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. "You look perfect, sweetheart," I replied, reaching over to smooth down a rebellious curl that had escaped from under her cap. "Absolutely perfect." David, my husband of 22 years, sat in the driver's seat scrolling through his phone with that familiar, distant expression he'd worn increasingly often over the past year. I'd attributed his detachment to work stress. His architecture firm had been struggling with several major projects. Looking back now, I realize how naive I'd been. "Dad, can you put the phone away for 10 minutes?" Sarah asked with the exasperated tone only teenagers can perfect. "This is kind of a big deal." David glanced up, his salt and pepper beard unable to hide the tight smile that never quite reached his eyes anymore. "Sorry, Princess. Just handling some business." Business. If only I'd known what kind of business. We found parking near Lincoln High School, where Sarah had spent 4 years transforming from my shy little girl into this confident young woman who was heading to Stanford in the fall. The late May sun cast everything in golden light, and families in their Sunday best streamed toward the football field where folding chairs had been arranged in precise rows. "I need to go find my place with the other graduates," Sarah said, bouncing slightly on her heels. "I'll see you guys after, okay? Look for me in the S section." She hugged David first, a quick, casual embrace, then turned to me. Her hug lingered longer, and I found myself memorizing the feeling of holding her, sensing somehow that everything was about to change. "I'm so proud of you, baby," I whispered into her ear. "I love you, Mom," she whispered back. And then she was gone, swept away in a tide of black caps and gowns. David and I walked to the family section in comfortable silence, or what I mistook for comfortable silence. In reality, he was probably rehearsing what he was about to tell me. We found seats in the middle section with a decent view of the stage. Around us, families chatted excitedly, grandparents fumbled with cameras, and younger siblings complained about having to sit still. The ceremony began with the usual pomp and circumstance. Principal Martinez welcomed everyone, the valedictorian gave a speech about reaching for the stars, and the salutatorian talked about new beginnings. I was only half listening, too busy scanning the sea of graduates for Sarah's face. That's when David leaned over. "Elena," he said quietly, using my full name instead of the L he'd called me for over 2 decades. "We need to talk after this." Something in his tone made my stomach clench. "What about—" "Not here," he said, his eyes fixed on the stage. "After." But apparently, David couldn't wait for after. As Principal Martinez began reading names alphabetically, David's leg bounced with nervous energy. When they reached the M's, he leaned over again. "I can't do this anymore, Elena." "Can't do what?" I whispered back, trying to keep my voice down as families around us cheered for their graduates. "This, U.S., the marriage." His words hit me like physical blows. "I want a divorce." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Around us, people continued clapping and cheering, but their voices sounded muffled and distant. I stared at David's profile, the nose I'd kissed thousands of times, the jawline I'd traced with my fingers on lazy Sunday mornings, the lips that had just destroyed my world. "You're telling me this now?" I managed to whisper. "At Sarah's graduation?" "I couldn't wait anymore," he said, still not looking at me. I've been trying to find the right time for months, but there's never a right time for this kind of thing. Months? The word came out strangled. Before David could respond, we heard Principal Martinez call out, "Sarah Elena Castellanos." My daughter walked across that stage to receive her diploma, the culmination of years of hard work and dreams, while I sat there feeling like my chest was caving in. I managed to clap and even attempted a smile, but inside, I was falling apart. Sarah found us in the crowd afterward, her face glowing with achievement. She threw herself into my arms first this time. "Did you see me? I didn't trip." She laughed. "You were perfect," I said, my voice barely steady. "Just perfect." She hugged David next, and I watched him hold our daughter, our beautiful, brilliant daughter, while I wondered how he could drop this bomb on the same day we were celebrating her biggest achievement so far. "So, I was thinking we could go to Romano's for dinner," Sarah said, linking her arms through both of ours. "You know, our special place." Romano's was where we'd celebrated every major milestone in Sarah's life. Her first lost tooth, making the honor roll, getting her driver's license, acceptance to Stanford. The thought of sitting through dinner pretending everything was normal while my marriage crumbled made me feel sick. "Actually, sweetheart," David said, "your mom and I need to discuss something first. Why don't you ride with the Hendersons and we'll meet you there?" Sarah looked between us, and I saw the exact moment she picked up on the tension. Her smile faltered. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I lied, forcing brightness into my voice. "We'll see you at the restaurant in an hour, okay?" After Sarah left with her best friend's family, David and I walked to our car in silence. The parking lot was emptying out, families heading off to their own celebrations while my world fell apart. "How long?" I asked once we were inside the car. "What? How long have you been planning this? How long have you wanted out?" David started the engine but didn't put the car in drive. "Elena, you have to understand." "How long, David?" 2 years, he said quietly. "Maybe longer." 2 years. While I'd been planning Sarah's graduation party, helping her with college applications, believing we were partners in raising our daughter and building our life together, he'd been planning his escape. "Is there someone else?" The pause before his answer told me everything I needed to know. "Her name is Melissa," he said. "She's a project manager at the firm." Of course she was. Young, probably. Probably didn't have stretch marks from carrying his child or gray roots that needed touching up every 6 weeks. Probably didn't know that he left his socks on the bedroom floor, or that he had nightmares about his father's death and needed to be held like a child until he stopped shaking. "How long?" I asked again. 8 months. 8 months. I repeated the words, trying to process them. "You've been cheating on me for 8 months. I didn't plan for it to happen, Elena. It just... Don't." I held up a hand. "Don't you dare tell me it just happened. You made choices, David. Every single day for 8 months, you made the choice to betray me." We sat in silence for a long moment. Around us, the last few cars were leaving the parking lot. Soon, we'd be alone with the wreckage of our marriage. "What's your plan?" I asked finally. "I've already talked to a lawyer. We can do this amicably for Sarah's sake. Split everything 50-50, shared custody even though she's 18 now." "You've already talked to a lawyer." The hits just kept coming. "Of course you have. How thoughtful of you to get your ducks in a row before bothering to tell your wife." "Elena, please. I know you're hurt." "Hurt?" I laughed, but it came out broken and bitter. "Hurt doesn't begin to cover this, David. You just told me that for 2 years. 2 years you've been living a lie. That while I was loving you, supporting you, building a life with you, you were already gone. And you waited until today, of all days, to tell me. I thought it would be easier after Sarah graduated. One less complication. Complication. I turned to look at him fully for the first time since this nightmare began. Is that what our daughter is to you? A complication? You know that's not what I meant. Do I? Because right now I don't know anything about you at all. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah asking if we were okay and when we'd be at the restaurant. Looking at her message, something shifted inside me. All my life, I'd been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed things over, who sacrificed my own needs to keep everyone else happy. When David's business was struggling, I'd taken on extra freelance work to help with the bills without being asked. When his mother was dying, I'd been the one to coordinate her care while he fell apart. When Sarah was going through her difficult teenage years, I'd been the buffer between her and David's impatience. I'd spent 22 years putting David's needs first, and this was how he repaid me. But as I looked at Sarah's text, I realized something else. My daughter didn't know yet. As far as she was concerned, we were still a family. This was still her graduation day, still one of the most important days of her life. And David wanted to go to Romano's and pretend everything was normal while he destroyed everything we'd built together. We're going to dinner, I said suddenly. What? We're going to Romano's. We're going to celebrate our daughter's graduation. And you're going to sit there and smile and act like the proud father you should be. Elena, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't care what you think is a good idea. My voice was steadier now, fueled by a growing rage that felt cleaner than the devastation I'd been drowning in. You've had 8 months to plan this betrayal. I'm asking for one dinner. One meal where we celebrate Sarah's achievement without your drama overshadowing it. It's not drama, Elena. It's our reality. No, David, it's your reality, your choice. But I won't let you destroy this day for her. He stared at me, clearly surprised by the steel in my voice. Good. He should be surprised. The Elena who'd spent 22 years accommodating his every need was gone, shattered on the floor of the school parking lot along with everything else I'd thought I knew about my life. Fine, he said finally. One dinner. But we need to tell her soon. We? I laughed again, that same broken sound. Oh no, David. This is your mess. You get to explain to our daughter why you're breaking up our family for some woman at your office. The drive to Romano's passed in tense silence. I spent the time thinking about everything I'd given up for this man. I'd been a promising graphic designer when we met, with job offers from agencies in New York and Los Angeles. But David had been building his practice here, and I'd loved him, so I'd stayed. I'd freelanced, taken smaller local jobs, built my life around his dreams and ambitions. When Sarah was born, I'd been the one to scale back my work even further. David's career was more stable, he'd argued. His income was more reliable. It made sense for me to be the primary caregiver, and I'd agreed because I'd loved Sarah more than life itself and wanted to be there for every moment of her childhood. But now Sarah was grown, heading off to college, and what did I have to show for my sacrifices? A husband who'd been planning his escape for years, and a career that had never reached its potential because I'd always put everyone else first. Romano's was busy, filled with other families celebrating graduations. Sarah had already secured us a table, and she waved us over with a huge smile. She looked so happy, so proud, so completely unaware that her world was about to implode. I already ordered the calamari, she announced as we sat down, and I got us a bottle of champagne. Well, sparkling cider for me, but still. That sounds perfect, sweetheart, I said, managing what I hoped was a convincing smile. David, to his credit, tried to play along. He asked Sarah about her summer plans, complimented her valedictorian speech. She'd been salutatorian, but I didn't correct him, and even managed to laugh at her jokes. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept checking his phone, the guilty way he avoided my eyes. So, Sarah said as our entrees arrived, I know you guys have been stressed about money lately, especially with Stanford's tuition coming up. But I got some great news today that I wanted to save for dinner. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. What kind of news? I got the Morrison Scholarship, she said, practically bouncing in her seat. The full-ride one I applied for back in January but never heard back about. Apparently, another student declined theirs, and I was next on the list. Stanford is completely paid for, the Morrison Scholarship. I remembered her working on that application, staying up late to perfect her essays, asking me to proofread them multiple times. It was incredibly competitive. Only 5 students nationwide received it each year. Sarah, that's amazing, I said, reaching across to squeeze her hand. I'm so proud of you. Yeah, now you and Dad don't have to worry about the money, and you can maybe finally take that trip to Italy you've been talking about forever. Italy. We'd been planning that trip for 15 years, always putting it off for some reason. Sarah's activities, David's work, never enough money, never the right time. It had become a joke between us, this mythical Italian vacation we'd take someday. I looked at David, wondering if he'd planned to take Melissa to Italy instead. That's wonderful news, Princess, David said, but his voice sounded strained. Really wonderful. Sarah noticed something was off. She was too smart not to. Okay, what's going on? She asked, looking between us. You guys have been weird all evening. Are you fighting about something? We're not fighting, David said quickly. Then what? Because the tension at this table is thick enough to cut with a knife. I watched David squirm, saw him open his mouth and then close it again. This was his moment, his chance to tell our daughter what he'd done. Instead, he took a large gulp of wine and said, Just work stress. That's all. Coward. Actually, I said, setting down my fork, your father has something he wants to tell you. David's eyes went wide. Elena. No, go ahead, David. Tell Sarah about your big decision. The color drained from his face. Not here. Not now. When? Then. When exactly is the right time to tell our daughter that you're abandoning your family for another woman? The words were out before I could stop them, hanging in the air like poison gas. Sarah's face went white. What? She whispered. David looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Sarah, let me explain. You're leaving? Sarah's voice cracked. You're leaving Mom? It's complicated, Princess. Don't call me that. Sarah snapped, tears starting to flow. Don't you dare call me that when you're… She couldn't finish the sentence. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away. How could you? She demanded, staring at David. How could you do this to Mom? To us? Sarah, please, you don't understand. Then explain it to me, she shouted, loud enough that other diners turned to look. Explain to me how you can sit here at my graduation dinner and destroy our family. David looked around nervously at the stares we were attracting. Can we please discuss this at home? No, Sarah said, standing up. I'm done. I'm going to Emma's house. Sarah, wait. I started to rise, but she held up a hand. I need some time to process this, she said, her voice shaking. I can't look at either of you right now. And then she was gone, leaving David and me alone at a table set for 3, the champagne flat, and the celebration in ruins. Look what you've done, David hissed. What I've done? I stared at him in disbelief. This is what you wanted, David. You wanted to tell her. Well, congratulations. Now she knows her father is a cheating, cowardly piece of garbage. You had no right. I had no right. I'm her mother. I'm your wife. I have every right. David threw his napkin on the table. I'm leaving. Of course you are. That's what you do, isn't it? When things get difficult, you run away. He stood up, pulled out his wallet, and threw a handful of bills on the table. "I'll be staying at a hotel tonight. We can discuss the details of the divorce next week." "Can't wait to get back to Melissa?" I called after him, not caring anymore who heard. He didn't answer, just walked away, leaving me alone with the wreckage of our family dinner. I sat there for a long time, staring at Sarah's untouched plate, the wilted flowers in the center of the table, the happy families around us who had no idea their lives could be destroyed in a single conversation. The waiter came by to ask if everything was all right, and I almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. Finally, I paid the check and walked to my car. My phone had several missed calls from Sarah and a text that said, "Mom, I'm sorry I ran out. Are you okay?" "I'm at Emma's." I texted back, "I'm okay, sweetheart. Stay as long as you need. I love you." But I wasn't okay. I was the opposite of okay. I was a 45-year-old woman whose husband had just blown up her life, and I had no idea what came next. That's when I saw David's car still in the parking lot. He was sitting in the driver's seat talking animatedly on his phone. Even from a distance, I could see him gesturing, could imagine the conversation he was having, probably calling Melissa, telling her how badly it had gone, how unreasonable I'd been, how he couldn't wait to be done with his complicated, dramatic wife. And that's when something snapped inside me. I'd spent 22 years being the understanding wife, the supportive partner, the woman who put everyone else's needs before her own. I'd sublimated my career, my dreams, my ambitions for this man and our family. And this was how he repaid me, by having an affair, by planning his escape in secret, by destroying our daughter's graduation day with his selfishness. But David had made one crucial mistake. In his eagerness to get away from me, he'd forgotten that I knew all his secrets. I knew about the creative accounting he'd done to avoid taxes 3 years ago. I knew about the client he'd bribed to get a major contract. I knew about the corners he'd cut on the Riverside project that could have resulted in serious safety issues. Most importantly, I knew about the money. 3 years ago, David's aunt had died and left him $200,000, money that was supposed to be our inheritance, our safety net, Sarah's college fund. David had told me he'd invested it conservatively in bonds, that it was growing slowly but safely for our future. But I'd seen the bank statements, not the ones he'd shown me, carefully edited to hide the real numbers, but the real ones. The ones I'd found when I was looking for our tax documents last month. David had invested that money in high-risk stocks, and he'd lost almost all of it in a series of bad trades. $185,000 gone. Money that should have secured Sarah's education, our retirement, our future. Money he'd gambled away and then lied about for 3 years. Sarah's scholarship wasn't just good news. It was a miracle that had saved us from financial disaster. David knew it, and I knew it. But Sarah had no idea how close we'd come to losing everything because of her father's recklessness. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Marcus Webb, David's business partner and best friend since college. Marcus, who had no idea that David had been lying to everyone, who trusted David completely, who had co-signed on several major loans for their firm. Marcus, who would be very interested to know that his business partner had been embezzling money from their joint accounts to cover his stock losses. My finger hovered over Marcus's number. Once I made this call, there would be no going back. David's career, his reputation, his future with Melissa, it would all be over. But then I thought about Sarah's face at dinner, the devastation and confusion when she realized her family was falling apart. I thought about all the years I'd wasted supporting a man who'd been planning to leave me. I thought about Melissa, whoever she was, probably young and naive enough to believe that David was an honorable man leaving an unhappy marriage. I made the call. "Marcus? It's Elena. I'm sorry to bother you so late, but there's something you need to know about David." The conversation lasted 20 minutes. Marcus was shocked, then angry, then coldly furious as I walked him through everything I knew. David's gambling, his lies, the missing money, the creative accounting that had put their firm at risk. Jesus, Elena, Marcus said finally. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Neither did I, until recently. Marcus, I need you to know, I'm not doing this to hurt you or the business. I'm doing it because you deserve to know the truth before he drags you down with him. I appreciate that. And Elena, I'm really sorry about the divorce too. David's an idiot. Yes, I said, looking across the parking lot where David was still on his phone, probably sweet-talking Melissa while his world burned around him. He really is. After I hung up with Marcus, I made 3 more calls. The first was to the IRS tip line, reporting David's tax irregularities. The second was to the state licensing board that oversaw architects, reporting the safety violations on the Riverside project. The third was to Tom Harrison, David's biggest client and the man David had bribed to get the riverfront development contract. By the time I finished my calls, it was almost midnight. David was no longer in the parking lot, probably off to his hotel to celebrate his freedom with Melissa. He had no idea what was coming. I drove home to our empty house, the house I'd decorated, the garden I'd planted, the life I'd built that David was so eager to abandon. Sarah's graduation cap and gown were hanging on the back of her bedroom door, a reminder of what should have been a perfect day. I poured myself a large glass of wine and sat in the kitchen, waiting. My phone was buzzing with texts from Sarah asking if I was okay, if I wanted to talk. I texted back that I was fine and needed some space to think, which was mostly true. The first call came at 6:47 a.m. David's voice was frantic, desperate. Elena, what have you done? Good morning to you too, David. How was your night with Melissa? Marcus is calling for an emergency meeting. He says there are irregularities in the books. Elena, please tell me you Didn't what? Didn't tell your business partner that you've been stealing money to cover your gambling debts? It wasn't stealing. It was a loan. A loan that Marcus didn't know about. A loan you couldn't pay back because you lost almost everything. Elena, you don't understand what you've done. This could destroy everything I've worked for. Good, I said calmly, sipping my coffee. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to destroy everything I've worked for. This is insane. You can't just... Actually, I can. And I did. David, you seem to be under the impression that I'm the same doormat I've been for the past 22 years. But here's the thing. When you decided to betray me, to lie to me, to plan your escape while I was still building our life together, you lost the right to expect me to protect you. But the firm, Marcus could lose everything too. Marcus will be fine. He's honest, hardworking, and talented. He'll recover from this. You? I'm not so sure. There was a long pause. When David spoke again, his voice had changed, become harder. You vindictive bitch. Do you have any idea what you've done? And there it was. The real David. The one who'd been hiding behind the facade of the devoted husband and father. The one who could look me in the eye and plan to abandon me while I was still cooking his dinner and washing his clothes and believing in our future together. I've done exactly what you did to me, I said. I've destroyed your trust, your security, your future. The only difference is, you deserved it. Elena, please. Oh, and David? You might want to check your email. The IRS is very interested in your creative bookkeeping from 2019. Apparently, they don't consider bribing clients to be a legitimate business expense. I could hear him hyperventilating on the other end of the line. You're destroying me, he whispered. No, David. I'm just revealing who you really are. You destroyed yourself the moment you chose to betray your family. I hung up and blocked his number. The next few weeks were chaos. but it was the kind of chaos that comes from watching someone else's world fall apart instead of having your own world destroyed. David's partnership with Marcus dissolved within days. The IRS investigation resulted in substantial fines and penalties. The state licensing board suspended his architectural license pending a full investigation of the Riverside project. Tom Harrison, furious about the bribery attempt, spread word throughout the business community that David couldn't be trusted. Within a month, David had lost his business, his reputation, and most of his assets to legal fees and fines. Melissa, it turned out, wasn't quite as devoted as she'd claimed to be when David was a successful architect. She disappeared the moment his world started crumbling, leaving him alone in his hotel room with the ruins of his life. Sarah was devastated at first, angry with both of us for destroying her family. But as the truth about David's lies came out, as she learned about the lost inheritance money and the years of deception, her anger shifted. She still loved her father, but she understood why I'd done what I'd done. "He lied to us for years, Mom," she said one evening as we sat in the garden I'd planted, watching the sunset over the roses David had never bothered to help me tend. About the money, about Melissa, about everything. How could we trust him after that? "I don't know, sweetheart. I really don't." "Are you sorry? About what you did to him?" I thought about it honestly. "I'm sorry that it came to that. I'm sorry that he made choices that forced me to make those choices. But am I sorry that I protected myself and you from his lies? Number. I'm not. Sorry about that." 6 months after graduation day, I received divorce papers that gave me everything: the house, the car, what little remained of our savings. David had no choice but to accept my terms. He had no leverage, no money for lawyers, no reputation to protect anymore. I started my graphic design business again, reaching out to old contacts, building a client base. It was terrifying and exhilarating, like being 25 again, but with the wisdom of 45. Sarah helped me design my website from her dorm room at Stanford, where she was thriving academically and socially. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she told me during one of our video calls. "It took guts to start over." "I didn't really have a choice," I said. "Everyone has a choice. Dad chose to be a coward. You chose to be brave." A year later, my business was thriving. I'd landed several major accounts, hired 2 junior designers, and moved into a beautiful office space downtown. I'd also started dating again, tentatively, carefully, but with an openness I hadn't felt in years. David tried to contact me several times, usually through Sarah or mutual friends. He wanted to reconcile, to work things out, to rebuild our family. But I'd learned something important in the wreckage of our marriage. Love without respect is worthless, and I would never again settle for being someone's second choice, their safety net, their convenient placeholder. The last I heard, David was working as a draftsman for a small firm in another state, trying to rebuild his career from the ground up. He'd moved in with his sister, was seeing a therapist, and had apparently found religion. Sarah visited him occasionally and said he seemed genuinely remorseful, but also broken in ways that might never fully heal. I didn't take any pleasure in his downfall. Not really. But I didn't regret it either. He'd made his choices, and I'd made mine. The difference was, his choices had been about betrayal and deception, while mine had been about truth and self-preservation. On the second anniversary of Sarah's graduation, I took that trip to Italy I'd been dreaming about for 15 years. Not with David, as I'd once imagined, but alone. I spent 2 weeks wandering through Rome, Florence, and Venice, eating incredible food, seeing breathtaking art, and falling in love with the person I'd become. Stronger, more independent, more authentically myself than I'd ever been during my marriage. Standing on the Ponte Vecchio in Florence, watching the sunset paint the Arno River gold, I thought about that terrible day when my world had fallen apart in a high school parking lot. I'd thought it was the end of everything, but it had actually been the beginning. The beginning of a life where I put myself first, where I demanded honesty and respect, where I refused to settle for less than I deserved. David had thought he was leaving me for something better, but in the end, I was the one who'd found something better: myself. And unlike the marriage he'd thrown away for a woman who disappeared at the first sign of trouble, what I'd built couldn't be destroyed by anyone else's choices. It could only be strengthened by my own. I sent Sarah a photo from the Trevi fountain with the caption, "Making wishes come true, one day at a time." She texted back immediately, "You're amazing, Mom. I'm so proud of you." And for the first time in years, I was proud of myself too. Proud of the woman who'd refused to be destroyed, who'd fought back against betrayal, who'd rebuilt her life from ashes into something beautiful and strong and entirely her own. The husband who'd announced he was leaving me at our daughter's graduation had started screaming when I'd refused to let him destroy me quietly. But his screams had faded to whispers, then to silence, while my voice had only grown stronger. And that, I realized as I tossed my coin into the fountain and made a wish for Sarah's happiness and my own continued strength, was the sweetest revenge of all.